Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Poor Things. This was directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. I have kind of a personal rule where I try at least not to go into movies with a ton of expectation, just because, my innocence as a film reviewer is a little bit tarnished compared to maybe your average person. I try to avoid trailers and such if I can, though it is quite difficult a lot of the time. But I admit, with this one, I did build it up a lot just because, it's Yorgos Lanthimos. I just adore him as a filmmaker, as an artist, and I've talked about his films, I think, on here a couple of times, but yeah, I just think he's one of the very best directors in the world. I know that his style of dialogue and maybe his style of satire might be a little bit stilted for some people. Even for myself, I wasn't fully on board the first time that I saw a Lanthimos film, just because I found him to be a little bit too calculated. I felt like he was slightly overworking a lot of the tragic comedy aspects of his films at times, the metaphors at least. But for whatever reason, when I saw The Favorite, it just really clicked for me, which is interesting because that's the one film where he did not direct and write it. He only directed it. And it allows for a lot of the absurdism and a lot of those things that he's exploring to be more, I think, just settled overall, and they feel more whole. And that's just my personal opinion. But now we have Poor Things, which it's quite an experience, and it's hard to describe it. It's whimsical, it's plucky, it's prickly, like most Yorgos Lanthimos films are. It is ultimately a coming-of-age story, but it is so dense in its visuals, in its world building. Because of that, it can go in all these interesting directions. It feels more free and more confident. It can burst into color. After it's been in black and white for a long time, it can slip into, yes, surreal absurdism. It embraces the gray area and the more clean-cut, everything that is honest, but through some sort of gothic, kaleidoscopic fairy tale type of experience. Felt, yes, like the essence of Terry Gilliam or like Monty Python, but filtered again through the Lanthimos style. I'd call this a Frankenstein film, but through a neo-feminist framework, though I don't think it's just neo-feminism that we're talking about here. I think it carries fragments of all the different struggles of the tightropes we walk as women and men throughout time. It's like you can feel all that subliminal stuff just echoing through the imagery in this film. I kept just seeing in my mind like flashes of like nail markings in an asylum from like a woman who might have been labeled hysterical. Can't help but think of The Yellow Wallpaper, the short story, which is, kind of exploring a woman trapped in her surroundings by a man, and just the mental decay creating kind of a glitch in the imagery, a glitch in the pattern. And Emma Stone just carries all of these flashes just kind of flickering in her eyes and just through her facial expressions. She is, yeah, representing that feral, untamed girl that must be ravaged, essentially. The idea of what really is woman and the contradictions there, because yes, the woman is diminutive and submissive by nature, and yet so powerful in her temptation that she's often the one in control, just in a different way. Lanthimos is known as a writer for how he can use a lot of the civilized social manipulations of words to contrast the more honest behavior from humans, to highlight, the peculiarity of how we survive around one another. It's very Kubrickian in that sense. Some accuse him of being maybe too Kubrickian, but I do think that his style is more pointedly dry, and I do think in Poor Things he's really separating himself and becoming more and more his own in a way that I find to be really breathtaking. It uses all of its devices so well, like, this is set in the Victorian era, and that's perfect because naturally that's going to highlight the discrepancies between, that hedonistic sexual urge that we all have, and of course the polished, civilized society, the comedy of manners aspect of Lanthimos films. And of course, just the exaggerated idea of, the main character having a woman's body, but she has a child's brain, so she can explore everything with the responsibilities of being a woman, and yet she has the childlike brain that is going to grow through the experience. Exploring human behavior through art in order to highlight maybe the humor of it. We see that a lot, but I've never quite seen it done in the way that we see it from Yorgos Lanthimos. And I felt like him using sexuality for this particular movie, that being kind of at the forefront of things, I really just thought was genius. Because the thing about sex, and it's like, I think about this all the time, who doesn't? But it's just like the colorful kinks people have. Most of these things no one will ever know. Most people will never utter it. And yet all of this is so ridiculously commonplace. It's like you don't know the person who is sitting across from you in the break room at work. It's like they could be fucking freaks. This giant unspoken secret between adults. And it's like, yes, it's the contradiction of sex being the most primal, visceral impulse, or one of them that we experience as humans. The need to be mature as an adult on the subject of sex and the emotions that it can muster, all of that, it can turn people into absolute monsters, idiots, raving lunatics, children. So again, this is a wonderful way to explore all the comedy, the darkness, the complexity of our protagonist, and just the complexity of human beings. And the film makes you feel all kinds of different things. I think it's beautiful, it's wondrous, but it's also very squalid, it's very perverse, always intriguing, but it never loses its sense of what it is. It doesn't get overwhelmed by its own ideas or new metaphors that it's introducing, at least I would say for the first 2 acts. They continue to grow and fuse into new things, and it's always exciting. And there are a few times in the movie where you're just really not sure, like, what kind of space am I hanging in? I really don't know what's going on here. We have scenes that turn into these strange screwball kind of comedy dance sequences to philosophical chats with Jared Carmichael. I'm not kidding. He has a cameo in this film. I never expected that from Lanthimos for sure, but yeah, that's the kind of cameo that could absolutely be so jarring in the wrong ways, and it could totally fall flat. And yet, it was jarring, but in a way that completely works. Because I think this film is just more evolved than a lot of the ones that I see. It has an understanding of its world. It has an understanding of the humor and the camp factor. And I have to give Emma Stone so much credit because she carries so much of the weight of this film on her shoulders. And I think this is absolutely, without question, her best performance she's ever given. I think it's truly an artist's dream to be a part of a movie like this. If you just really love to be creative and explore that inner actor that you always wanted to be. Because here it's like, yeah, you're having permission. You get permission to rid yourself of all those inhibitions. And you can look as crazy as you want. You can look as ugly or strange as you want. And that's the point. And Stone has had a really interesting career in the sense that, yeah, she started off more in like comedies, and then she slowly started to establish herself as a really charismatic movie star. Of course, she wins her Oscar for La La Land. Great performance, but you know, it is a movie star type part. It is safe. And now she can go a little bit crazy because she's done everything. And I'm really loving that she's doing that. I'm loving that she's willing to challenge herself where so many people would just kind of phone it in from this point. And here she's reminding me of some of the great European actresses that I always like to talk about because she is that committed in the performance. And this reminded me of like a Isabella Adjani from Possession, one of my favorite films and one of my favorite performances by a female. You want to talk about fearless, that is the one. She's tumultuous in the most terrifying ways, and she takes you to a level of fear that very few people can. And I don't think that Emma Stone has quite gone to that level, but she's absolutely channeling it, and she's fairly close. Her face is perfect, I think, for this type of role because yes, she's got such big, wide eyes, and they seem so innocent, just at first glance. And yeah, I mean, again, it makes perfect sense for why she'd play somebody that's very childlike. And I think the range that she's built throughout her career has given her the ability to bring these kinds of shades to a role like this. It's the kind of thing that I feel like you work your whole career to get to a point like this. Bella, the main character in this, is essentially, like a symbol for a feminist. And yes, the idea of feminism these days, or the word feminism, I should say, is definitely a dirty word, understandably. And if you've watched my reviews, you know that I have, I'm quite opinionated on that subject. I think a lot of the neo-feminist films these days tend to try to explore feminism, but they only do so where it's skin deep. And yet, again, I can't help that I'm having a little bit of a mixed reaction because on one hand, it's like, yes, this movie is giving me all the things that I wish that other feminist films would. And I found this film way more relatable, way more interested in the woman's experience. A woman, searching for her autonomy and identity is always going to be relatable in some fashion, I think, but it's just about how you do it. And, for a while, this film was just so refreshing in that sense. But then at the same time, once our character starts to navigate more the muddy waters of sexuality, I feel like there's less to be gained for her just from a narrative perspective. And thus I feel like a lot of the points don't hit home as much in the third act. And as she starts to lose herself, I feel like we don't really feel that sense of darkness and the repercussions of it for her. And I guess if I wanted this to be truly relatable in the ways that, fully hit home for me, that would exist in the film. A woman, when she reaches a certain age, starts to realize that she has a sexual power over men. And that is something that they use as a means of control, naturally. And, here, I just felt like her sense of liberation, once she's kind of plateaued, to a certain level, it's like, where do you go from here? Then it's just kind of a sense of aimlessness. And I do think the film is emphasizing that, which I think is really important. That is an aspect of feminism that a lot of these movies do miss. But no, in truth, it's way more complicated than that. And sexuality often reinforces the will of man, reinforces the dominance of man, as much as women want to pretend that's not true. And so, the cycle can be quite vicious. I don't see that as a neo-feminist struggle. I think that women throughout time have struggled with a lot of these ideas to varying degrees. And from the feminist angle, the neo-feminist angle, if we want to talk about that, the need for the woman to have her cake and eat it too, so to speak, it often creates caveats in the feminist argument from my point of view. And so, yeah, that starts to happen here. It's like Bella starts to become that person. She starts to feel, bitter and angry at people, and thus she starts to want to explore more means of control, more the dominant gene that she has, more the masculine aspects of herself. You learn about why she is the way that she is, her origin story in a sense, in the movie, and yeah, that plays a huge part in what she represents. She is a broken woman trying to be pieced together from the start. It's like she's born into kind of a circumstance that is going to be difficult for her, and so she's born, in a broken home in a sense. She only has a father, so her situation, always being at the hands of men, all of that is heavily going to shape how she is, obviously, but she's also steering that ship, and she's going to really start to navigate things in interesting ways. And I found all of that really cool, the way it was percolating. But again, I do wish that the third act could have explored her struggles a little bit more, especially the darkness that comes from the aftermath of all of these choices that she's made up to this point. And also, maybe this is just me, this is something that I crave in these types of movies, but I think it would be really nice for like a feminist film to have like a romantic male lead who's like really complex, where she like meets her match, to show that men can be more than just barriers for women in various ways, that they can actually serve them in interesting ways. They're more than archetypes here. Like, to me, I think it would be really interesting is like, what if Bella met somebody that actually challenges her, that she actually likes? What if somebody got to her heart? Now that would be interesting. That's where we get to see who she really is. I feel like you would get a better sense of what she's learned through something like that, though. Again, maybe I should watch the film again. Maybe I've missed some things. But I will say, I think that the Willem Dafoe character in the movie, I thought he was just wonderful. It's like a really pleasant surprise. He provides the light and shade that we need here. He's like the one male character, one of the few male characters, I should say, who has an honesty about him. Yes, in the beginning, you see him one way, but then that gets subverted. It's like he's called God because he is, the person who created the Frankenstein monster. He is the one who controls Bella. And so naturally you have all of those stereotypical images in your head of like the mad scientist villain and like, he's a sadist, all these things. But ultimately, he's a gentle soul, and he's quite understanding of Bella. He's the only person who gives her a chance to reach her true potential, even if it means losing her, because he actually cares about her. And his paternal instincts, he says in the movie, outweigh his sexual interests, and there's a real beauty about that. I love that he's learning to do things not selfishly. Yes, he's doing a lot of things for selfish purposes in the movie, but slowly he starts to learn from them. He came from the worst circumstances himself, and yet it's played for comedy in the most brilliant way. But yeah, he's able to see the world in a different way because he found an unlikely love. And that I thought was, yes, really, really beautiful. And I thought, well, that was one of the more powerful relationships in the entire film by far. And Willem Dafoe, he's just magnificent. It's like, we know that he's funny, and yet I saw another shade to his comedy ability here. It's just the accent that he's using just adds another layer of humor, the inflections, the gentle way with which he is presenting such brutal information to us, very innocuous information. He is just one of our most fearless performers. And I think, yeah, this movie really requires its actors to be fearless. Maybe it is too Freudian to get into, but yes, paternal and romantic feelings can sometimes overlap in interesting circumstances. And yes, I think a feminist experience where the woman must face potential rewards a man could offer her, I think would make for a more emotionally rich experience as a story. I have to tell you, I loved this movie. I absolutely love it, and I cannot wait to watch it again. And if you are a Yorgos Lanthimos fan, you have to see this film because it is just another wonderful addition to his canon, and something I think you will also, like, it's obviously something that is very him, and yet I think you will be surprised by it, which is fantastic. This is him at his most playful, I think, and he's more loose when it comes to trying to explore different things. And this is just a dazzling movie, and it takes you in all kinds of interesting directions, and I love him for it. And I think this is absolutely one of the best films of the year. So see it, see it. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for your support, and welcome to all the new members. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.